it's really relationship building. Like I said, I went to Parliament 64 times. I went to Federal Executive Council at least 100 times. This is over a 3-year period. So first, you have to decide if you want to do it. And it's not for everybody because it's not fun. You know, it's not a joyous time. The effect of it and the fact that, you know, I can say that we ran the largest energy access program that easily connecting 90,000 people a month now to solar energy, that is fun, but that happened when I left. So you also have to recognize that sometimes you have the seed for someone else to take over, and that is okay. I think we spend so much time focusing on ourselves, our legacies, but our legacy might be 10 years down the line, and that is okay. But it does take a lot, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody or any other team, so we really need to sort out how the DFI and the MDBs actually focus.
And thank you for your leadership. Thank you. Talking about foundation and leading, I was at Damilola's Sustainable Energy for All Leadership Council. When I started Sustainable Energy for All, it was 4 of us. So you can imagine my pride when she says, I have grown it to 90 people, maybe $50 million. Let's give her a round of applause for that. Honorable Minister from Ghana, I turn to you. She's explained the critical importance for her to bring back those 24 people from all over the world, smart Nigerians, designing projects, knowing energy economics, the engineering. In Ghana, I visited you in March, your ministry, and I've seen that you've also created technical units, and in fact, you will have the first delivery unit from Clean Cooking Alliance. How important is that technical capacity for you to help you drive policy, build strategy, access finance?
Well, thank you for having me. I guess that at the heart of it all is the need to coordinate the activities of the various agencies that are tasked with the responsibility of rolling out the program, okay? Because you have various MMDAs that are tasked with the responsibility. It's not a question of only one agency, okay? And so at the heart of it really is the political will that we as a country have demonstrated over the years with ensuring that we strive towards achieving our net zero agenda and the attainment of our sustainable development goals.
Minister just mentioned the other dimension, coordinating the many ministries that all have an input in this, and you've been able to do that very well. However, sometimes you still have this challenge of getting even the private sector involved, coordinating that as well. How have you been able to do that?
Well, our experience has been different because we have worked quite closely with the Ghana Alliance for Clean Cooking in rolling out programs and policies that ensure that we are able to transition. We recall that we here in Ghana, as we speak, we have about 87% electricity access across the country. We are the most powered country in the entire sub-region of West Africa. And the appreciation that we have is that the private sector is key, together with the governmental agencies, ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure that we are able to achieve this. So we've worked very closely with the Ghana Alliance on Clean Cooking. The ministry has set up the scaling up of the renewable energy program that is all ensuring that we are able to provide clean cooking solutions for the greater majority of our people.
Thank you. Sophie, yesterday I was just blown. I was in the session and you presented what you're doing in Kenya. And of course, you remember many of us wanting to say, how can we get it done? But in our countries, some of them just beginning this journey, the technical capacity is even lacking to begin to talk to private sector folks like you, to get the first policy in place, take the paper to Parliament. What's your experience in dealing with governments that do have such capacity and those that do not have?
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here, and I'm glad to see very familiar faces. So we as Cocoa Networks, we have engaged with government for the last 8 years. It's been a journey. As with any private sector player, it's a challenge first in getting government to understand what it is you're pitching. Most of the times there is clarity from government, as has been spoken about in terms of policy. So they're very clear, let's say specifically within the clean cooking area. They have a strategy in place. They have policies in place. What they lack more often than not is how do you execute it, where do you plug in as private sector? More so if you're offering an innovative solution. So for us, we were offering a solution that was not covered within their policy. How do you approach getting them to understand what it is you're offering? You have to be willing to engage repeatedly. It's not a conversation that you will have. You'll not walk in one day, speak to the minister or speak to the principal secretary, and the doors are open. You have to speak to them repeatedly. You have to speak to the technical teams over and over again. You have to come and show them the solution. You have to repeatedly show them what value are you bringing in as private sector. What is it that you are doing for the country? And in return, what do you want the government to do for you? It's always a give and take. Most of the times when we engage with government, government says private sector is always seeking fiscal incentives. And they're right. You cannot execute, you cannot nurture a project or an idea without support from government. You require that enabling environment. Government has to be willing to come to the table and say, we are going to give you this enabling policy environment for the next 5 years. What are you going to do for us in return? How are you going to enable us achieve our objectives? Governments have put in place NDC targets. They're not going to achieve those by themselves. They have to be willing to open the door for private sector. So for us, it's been a long journey. We've seen the doors open. As the minister alluded to, you engage with different ministries because everybody has a role to play, whether it's Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Energy, everyone has a stake in the game. We need to be talking, all of us, at the same time. We need to be aiming for the same target. And for as long as the target is the same and you're bringing private sector along, there's no reason why we cannot accelerate and be able to achieve the targets we've set.
So it's been useful to you having a dedicated unit that you can interact with regularly in relevant ministries?
In most ministries, they have had to create or at least provide such a dedicated person. What CCA is proposing is currently not available. That is why it's such a welcome idea. We've had to nurture relationships. I've had relationships spoken to in the various ministries. So it's not often that you find governments willing to put together what you call a technical working group. That is what essentially we've had to do in Kenya, put together a technical working group that brings in people from the various ministries, and they're able to then understand what is it us as COCO are aiming to do, because we've had to take the initiative ourselves as private sector to say, we need this in place for us to be able to accelerate what it is we're offering. So we cannot always say, let's wait and see. Let's wait for them to put together. Let's wait for them to call meetings. We have to push for it to be done. We keep saying government is slow. It is. However, when they're shown there's value, they will move with speed. So a lot of times you have to be willing to put up your hand and say, let me put myself out there. Let me show you what we can do, and let's accelerate.
Dan, I come back to you. Long-term capacity building in governments over time. What has been your experience? I guess capacity building, it's a phrase that is so abused. But in the energy space, and as you look at clean cooking, what do we need to do in terms of building that capacity? Because remember, this session is about delivery. We have less than a decade to go. What do we need to do in terms of capacity building for some governments as we go forward?
Well, I strongly agree with Sophie. In fact, Kenya is a pretty interesting case because back in the 1990s, when there were few countries that had improved cook stove efforts of any kind, there were a couple different nucleation. At Kenyatta University, there was a couple NGO groups working on clean cook stoves. The ministry was divided, shall we say, in terms of their interest. But ultimately, the lessons around the Kenya ceramic jiko in particular, and the Kuni Mbili, one for really rural areas, one for kind of peri-urban areas, got enough federal attention because of community groups, because of NGOs, because of the push. Kenya wrote a white paper on clean cooking, and we got to participate. We were called to that out of the blue. Would you please come and work with experts in not just the Ministry of Energy, but also in the interior, in forestry, because all that had to be tied together. That's why it's hard, right? If you're going to do a policy around charcoal, you've got to think about how does this affect forestry policy, land use. There's a lot of pieces that get pulled together. But when it happened, Kenya then became the place in Africa with the most improved cook stoves per capita. Then you start to get the kind of things that happen here, where there are research efforts, that tie in not just people in the energy sector and forestry, but people in medicine, looking at the impact on childhood health, survivability for mothers, and in particular at-risk mothers and pregnancies. There's a whole variety of things that get pulled together. That became the Kenyan policy, and now you're seeing other countries having versions. That process wasn't easy. It's certainly not done, but from the early efforts when SDG 7 and when the Clean Cooking Alliance had these meetings, and there were 20 of us and 30 of us in a room, to this meeting, I think, you have 750 people at this record gathering, right? So I think the next step is to empower the governments that step forward, right? So one thing the US government is doing is this effort called Net Zero World, and it's to work with countries that develop a pathway to clean energy, and then to not only fund it, but to do technical work. So I think we're doing all right on the technical partnership. We're not doing as well on the funding of this yet, but getting other governments, like the government of Ghana and elsewhere, to step forward and say, we want to partner, and we're going to commit to SDG 7, the cooking aspect, the gender justice aspects. Those all fit together, and I think that's where this government pathway to deliver. And it's not one technology, it's not one solution, it's how do you meet the different needs of communities and households where they are. That's where I think the government role is so critical, because it has to provide that enabling environment. But as Sophie said, it takes a lot of work from partners along the way to make it happen.
I'm happy you gave that history of Kenya, because suddenly everybody says, we can be like Kenya. They forget that it's 20 years or 30 years. Ghana, we want to be like Ghana. 30 years. Continuous capacity building, public policy work to be where you are today. But Damilul, I come back to you. I've heard you talk about integrated planning. Yeah, we have argued that if we want to make a difference in the clean cooking space, it cannot be treated as an orphan. It has to be central to planning. But how can you do that central, integrated planning if you don't have dedicated specialists in clean cooking in government agencies? How can they be part of that dialogue?
So I'll answer. So one of my biggest mistakes, and I hardly ever say this, in Nigeria was
That's a courageous CEO.
Yeah. Biggest mistakes when I worked in Nigerian government was not putting cooking and electrification together, because it's not that difficult. So we were going and we were electrifying homes and then left them with the same cooking solution. But everybody was so excited we were electrifying homes, nobody thought about clean cooking, which really saddens me to say, but it's a fact. So when I took on this role, it just seemed ridiculous to do proper integrated energy planning without including clean cooking, and that's where CCA has played a critical role. So not only now when we do integrated energy plans, we try and see where all the people who don't have electricity, what's the best way to electrify them? Is it connect them to utility? Is it mini grids? Is it solar home systems? But we also do the same thing on the clean cooking end. What it allows you to do is have kind of bankable decks, right? So you can, beat your chest and say, Malawi, this is how much it's gonna cost me to provide clean cooking and electrification for my entire population. So when, again, back to this whole delivery unit thing, so there's no reason why the project management units that you have to set up, if you're getting any money from the AFDB or the World Bank, shouldn't have both people in there, right? And I think that's what we're finding now. So again, back to my home country, where we've just completed the energy transition plan, the part of the delivery unit there does have a clean cooking specialist, which I think is the first time it's ever happened, and this is Nigeria, in there as part of that. But that does not substitute what DIFNA is trying to do by having a dedicated team. It changes the conversation, and not having dedicated people who come from the clean cooking world or even understand it, and I'm still learning it, again, I'll be really honest, does hinder the growth of the space. And that's what I will encourage. Every time you're doing plans and doing programs, don't only look at it from the electrification point of view, don't only look at it from the clean cooking point of view, you have to look at the overall energy access, unless you'll be missing a bit.
Well, I can relate to that. I was a minister almost 30 years ago, going to cabinet without the briefing notes, because we didn't have the capacity. My country was at war. But fortunately, I was coming in there as a professor. So I would stay up till 5 in the morning and go to cabinet half asleep to do the presentation. But imagine the multi-dimensional nature of clean cooking and why we need, as colleagues have established, why we need these dedicated experts to support government policy, but also the coordination, being the focal point also for private sector when they come in. Mr. Minister, I was very impressed in March when I saw all what you were doing in clean cooking, and you've already moved into climate finance. You have some innovative areas where you're working now. How important will delivery units be to you in terms of tapping into climate finance going forward?
Yeah, even before I go there, it's important, the point that Damilola made about the building an integrated system, right? Where really, if you look at the Ghana experience, for example, for the 30 years that we did rural electrification, we really were not focusing on clean cooking as an aspect of that electrification project, okay? Because we saw electricity as an expensive commodity. And so the focus of government was really not to encourage the rural folk using electricity for cooking. But clearly, that should have been our focus right from the very beginning. I guess that the Ministry of Energy at the time didn't see itself as the agency responsible for ensuring that our women folk move away from wood fuel. Okay, they saw it as a health problem. So clearly we're working in a silo mentality where energy was seen as providing electricity and all that for our women folk.
And
so,
in fact, DIMFNA said this morning, break those silos.
yes.
Please say that.
So it's important that going forward, okay, we work in a coordinated manner, break the silos as you just indicated, and work in a manner that ensures that we are able to achieve holistically, okay, the electrification and clean cooking side by side. Okay, yeah, of course. I mean, new energy resources, energy financing, carbon market, and all that are areas that we're working on strongly in our energy transition agenda. Damilola made a point about Nigeria launching its energy transition plan. We have just completed ours as well. We're yet to launch, hopefully by the end of the month. The intention is for His Excellency the President to announce same at COP27 in Egypt, and I'm hopeful that that will guide our path into ensuring that Ghana achieves its SDGs by 2070. Yeah.
And I think for the government representatives here, the point that Damilola and the Minister have made is clean cooking has to be central when you're planning your energy transition plans now. It's not an afterthought.
Absolutely.
We just launched a roadmap, and there was no mention of clean cooking last week. So you can imagine how disappointed I am. I said, I hope DIMFNA does not see that video. But we'll fix it, DIMFNA. I'm going back to hammer the door. Say, Mr. President, they forgot something important. But Sophie, I heard you yesterday.
Sorry, Kadi, can I mention something?
Please.
In the plan for Nigeria to get to net zero by 2060, at least 30% of that plan is hindered on clean cooking. So I think it's important that you can't actually get to a point of net zero, even if you forgot about women, which people like to do, just on a climate basis with that.
And I think just to kind of illustrate this sort of planning horizon, when we started in this field, no one thought about electric cooking. That was just not on the agenda because solar power was expensive, rural electricity was expensive. It is still expensive in rural areas, let's be fair, even though in industrialized countries it is now cheaper to build new solar and wind than it is to operate existing fossil fuels. But that story changes as you get further and further from the big money and the big seats of power. But it is now so cheap to build clean energy projects if you can standardize them, if you can roll them out in kind of cookie cutter ways, that now we can think about cooking with electricity as an endpoint, not just for urban elites, but for rural poor. That's going to take a level of coordination between UN agencies, federal governments, private sector that want to build those solutions. But if we don't plan on it now, it simply won't happen because it requires a level of standardizing the mini-grid products, the electric home system products, but building them into the kind of planning that Damilola is mentioning for 2050 and 2060 plans. It's entirely possible. that is exactly the kind of thing that we need this sort of teamwork, this enabling environment to do. And it would change the story, because if you can overbuild clean, you can meet all kinds of new demands in ways that we're just not thinking about today.
Damilola said earlier, projects can also drive policy, and Coco has a good case where she was banging on the door in Kenya to say, we can deliver ethanol to households. Is it 600,000 households already you've delivered? But you said to me yesterday, without government, we could not have done it. The partnership, and they understand. Yeah. Over to you. And then I'll go down. I'm sure there are some questions folks want to ask. I'm tired of sitting here, so I'll take the mic down to you while you answer that.
Okay, thank you so much. So for us, Cocoa Networks, we've built a scalable solution that uses bioethanol. It's a 2-burner cooker, and we are able to deliver an affordable solution, because that's the challenge that faces a lot of people who use charcoal and firewood. The fact that they have low disposable income, how do you deliver a solution that they can actually use? Yeah? Yeah, that they can actually use. So we've as you've said, we've been in the Kenya market. We launched 3 years ago. We are in 4 cities. We are currently serving over 660,000 households. So that has proven the solution is actually scalable. Thank you. And our business model is very innovative. And I'm actually seeing one of the government representatives here. Let me acknowledge Dr. Faith. Yeah. Yes. They have been part of us walking this journey. We could not have gotten as far as we have without government support. It's been a push and pull. When we went to them with an innovative solution, they said, wait, we need to see what this is that you're talking about. If you actually, and please visit our booth, we'll be able to show you how our business operates. It's not a business that you can actually just tell someone about. They actually need to see it. So the government challenged us and told us, go and show us how it actually works. So we said, okay, let's take the challenge. We've gone, we have put it in the market, we have proven that it's scalable. We have had to subsidize it because the cooker retails at $15 for it to be affordable, but we said, let us show you how it can actually scale in terms of households transitioning due to getting the price point right. We've gotten the price point right by absorbing the tax ourselves, because we've gone to the government and we've repeatedly said, we need fiscal incentives, but they keep saying, you're not yet large enough. So now that we have 660,000 households, we have to ask them, are we large enough? Or will you tell us now we need to get to 1 million? We feel we are large enough, yeah? So they are listening to us. It's been a challenge. We are in the situation where now that we are able to provide the solution to households, the other part of the challenge is how do you get the fuel locally produced? Yeah, that is the other side of it. It's not enough for us to be able to build the demand. How does government step up? Because for us, we cannot build the ethanol industry. Someone else has to step up and be able to produce and supply that bioethanol. That is the challenge we are putting to the government. I'm seeing Dr. Linda Davis. She has set up a bioethanol factory in Kenya. So looking forward. Thank you so much. But again, I'm sure it's with support of the government. For us, we don't want to keep importing. Even when we come to Ghana, Mr. Minister, we will put the same challenge. Give us fiscal incentives, but provide an enabling environment for both ourselves and whoever is willing to come and invest in building a bioethanol factory, for them to be able to provide this. It's not possible if the two parts don't fit together. It's not possible for us to say any ambition about clean cooking will be achieved. We all have to step up. We all have to be willing. And I love what Damilola said about integrated. Kenya has the same challenge. We have put the accelerator down in terms of ensuring all households are connected to electricity. What good is it for you to have electricity? You have food in the house. You cannot cook it. Of what use is it to you? I'm glad that Kenya has taken the challenge. Clean cooking, I think we are developing a clean cooking strategy. We are hoping that once that is developed, it's a partnership. Bring all of us on board. Let us see how we can address the challenges facing everybody across the country. Thank you.
I'm happy to see. I'm happy to see that, in fact, there's going to be a deal between them and Ghana as well. That's why we come here. That's why a real deal. And Linda, I want to recognize you. I saw Linda 2019 in Brussels. We had to educate some folks there about clean cooking, and Linda was making that pitch for her plant as well. Good to see you today. A lady leading that revolution on ethanol in Kenya.
If I may.
Please, Mr. Minister.
I guess it's important to make the point that clean cooking really should be everybody's business.
Can we use that as a slogan? Clean cooking is everybody's business. Yes, sir.
I mean, I've been in forums where we've had conversations about the energy transition. And the talk really is that, well, it's not an African problem. But Africa is being called upon to contribute its quota in ensuring that we attain the net zero agenda. Commitments that have been made by the West have all not been met. And so we are going to explore our hydrocarbon resources in a much more environmentally friendly manner. Okay, and that we're going to transition at our pace. That conversation is one that I believe is fair. But when it comes to clean cooking, purely on health grounds alone, I think it is something that all of us should focus on to ensure that we provide an environment, an ecosystem, share ideas where our women folk especially, who are exposed to the ravages of wood fuel, cook in a clean environment, because everybody cooks, everybody eats. And if you don't cook, you can't eat. And so it's important that we make it everybody's business and drive the agenda such that we are able to achieve the objectives that we set for ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I am sure all the ladies are excited to hear a man, right, talk that way about cooking. Yeah. Cooking with dignity and being healthy. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. There's a young lady there. Please, go ahead. We want you to join this conversation, please.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm going to ask my question by telling the story first.
A short one.
Yeah, very short, actually, very short. I work off-grid in Nigeria. We deploy power, microgrids, essentially. So I handle operations. I'm saying this because to give some context to what I'm about to talk about. So we deployed power and then vis-a-vis clean cook stoves as well. But we did see a faster draw towards the use of electricity compared to the use of clean cook stoves. And then the question dawned on me that how do you spark value for the use of clean cooking, essentially? Because people would rather want to go for electricity with what I'd seen than rather go for a clean cook stove because they still prefer to use their firewoods, right, than the charcoal. So, I mean, it's a question I haven't been able to answer. So the question is, how do we spark value, right, for the use of clean cooking methods across, even in most developed areas, really, even in Lagos or wherever it is, you still see the need for wanting to use firewood at the backyard because it's way cheaper. So I repeat again, like, how do we spark value to use cleaner methods to cook, essentially?
I think Sophie will think about that question because she's been able to convince over 600,000 households. So Sophie, think about it. I see one at the back here. Another question at the back here. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Thamojit Chatterjee from SE for All. I work in the clean cooking team. So the country where I come from, India, I remember that clean cooking was not really, as electricity, not really a priority or a political priority issue. So we had election slogans which had electricity, water, food as the slogan. What would it take to make clean cooking a part of that slogan? And if the minister from Ghana or any of the distinguished panelists.
Wonderful. We have two questions, one for you, Sophie, one for minister as well, or anybody else who wants to do. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. When you're talking about showing value, if you think about anybody who's using charcoal or firewood, they're not using it by choice. Yeah? From the Kenya experience, it is because that is what is available to them. But if you ask them, what is their ambition? All of them know there's clean cooking. They know there's LPG. They may not know there's electricity, but they know there's a cleaner option. What they know is also that clean option is out of reach for them. So what we've done is bring them what they have always wanted at a price that they can afford and be able to sell to them the additional benefits around clean energy. So it is not something that you can do over media like TV or radio. We've had to do this one-to-one and one-to-many. It takes you actually have to show them, you have to demonstrate to them what your solution is offering. Then, more importantly, is around them. Yeah? Usually, if you think about in any community, the people who are first to take up any solution, yeah? What we've learned is if you target those people, the people who will be first to take up any solution once it's offered, show them what the solution can offer, they serve as a very good word of mouth. So they will be your mouthpiece to the people who are not easy to convince. But it's not been easy. I won't say that it's easy. In as much as I say we are talking to them, you talk to them the first time, they'll need to hear the message again. Because the first time they'll be like, oh, okay, I see. It's an ethanol cooker, it's a two-burner cooker. What's the price again? They'll say, no. That price, no. The normal price for a two-burner cooker is this. Then the next time they see you again, then they hear from their neighbor or from a family member that it actually works. Then they will come and they will buy. So a lot of the times it's multiple touch points, but more importantly, let them see around their community. Let it be part of their community. Let it be not something that is done, you drop it in and you disappear. We, as COCO, have become part of the community. Our unit of dispensing fuel is installed within the existing premises. So we don't come in and put in something completely new. Once you're working with what they already know, what they understand, it becomes easier for the narrative to pick up.
Thank you. Dan, I'll come to you in a minute. But Mr. Minister, what should be the new narrative?
Well, I guess one household, one cook stove will be the narrative for 2024 in Ghana.
One household, one cook stove. That's the new narrative. And hopefully it's an ethanol burner as well.
Yeah.
So I think we also have to recognize the dirty side of dirty energy is also subsidized. So in Senegal, in Kenya, and South Sudan, I've had myself and students and NGO volunteers sit at night, which is not so safe always, on the ring roads around the big cities, and you see lorries of charcoal coming in. It's produced illegally on national park land, on tribal community land. It contributes to Majimboism, it contributes to tension between ethnic groups, and it is frequently subsidized, and it's not the rural people who are doing it. It is to provide urban energy for the local elites. And so one of the features where governments can play a big role, it's not a fun role, is to recognize the many ways we subsidize dirty and penalize clean, right? And providing support for what Sophie's doing at COCO, providing support for sustainable, locally managed woodlots or electricity connections, that's all putting your money and where your mouth should be. But we consistently see governments, my own in the US included, we subsidize deforestation in the US and around the world. These are efforts that move against everything we talk about when we come to nice meetings and have tea outside. But that subsidy is huge, and it falls on rural people again and again.
Thank you. Take questions from there.
Thank you. My name is Marcy Rose. I am seeing some really good stories and great evidence from different countries that are doing great. So Kenya, Nigeria as well, as far as clean cooking is, access to clean cooking is concerned. So I'm just wondering then about taking a regional approach to collaborating and integrated planning. There are, these countries are part of a wider community, the East African community, the West African community, ECOWAS, for example. And within those regions, there are countries that are still quite behind in terms of planning and strategizing around not just clean cooking, but energy access in general. So to get towards universal access, how do we then think about supporting these countries so that they're not left behind in this development agenda? Obviously knowing that they are, in their own respect, they are republics of their own, they have their own systems and their own policies, but how do we then drive that from, looking at it from an international perspective?
Good. So I think we'll keep that question for Damilola, regional cooperation in some of these areas, but also those countries that are not Ghana and Kenya yet, like mine, way behind. What do we do about them? Next question? Yes, there's one over there as well. Yeah. Those that will be the last two. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Kola Oshino from Nigeria. Thanks to the panelists, especially Damlola, we are your legacy from the solar home system side. And my question is on that. If in Nigeria, for example, over 90,000 connections happening monthly on the solar home system side. From your own perspective, how do you think we can leverage that channel in distributing cook stove? We do that today. The customers that we sell solar home systems to and installations, we're trying to preach to them to take on cook stoves. But we have so many other private sector companies doing the same. And in my own experience, I think it's something that we need to explore as part of the integrative approach that you mentioned.
Excellent. It's a good, very good question. Last question. Oh, okay. There's a guy at the back and one in front.
Good afternoon. My name is Agnelli Kafue from the Ministry of Energy, Zambia. My question actually is regarding the part of, I think, His Honorable Minister and also Sophie, regarding the part of carbon credits. Carbon credits are very important, especially when it comes to actually helping startups, vis-a-vis helping them leverage financing and also helping them reduce the cost of production, including distribution. I wanted to actually understand in terms of how you're moving it in Ghana, including Kenya, because Zambia right now is developing the carbon credit policy to ensure that we actually help our startups. So I just wanted to learn from you, first of all, in terms of how to have structured programs to the point where there's no exploitation with the carbon credits part. Because I understand there are very few expertise in the carbon credit markets to the point where few startups, especially local startups, don't even stand the chance, for example, in terms of moving forward. Thank you.
I think Sophie will have some comments on that as well. Last question, yes, in front here. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Enoch Echepong, private sector, director of the Renewable Energy Association of Ghana. So he touched on one question, so I'll move to the other. Carbon credits was one. The second has to do with the youth population who are usually missing out of all these conversations. Because like you said, if it's taking 20 years to do something, then you definitely need to have the people that need to be thinking about it also here around. And many times they're quite missing from the conversation. So I just want to know how, from the strategies you mentioned, and I think you touched a bit on working with the youth in the background overnight and things like that. I'd just like to know what really the strategy is for getting them around the conversations, because a decade delivery and then 2063 is another thing to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think I'll touch on everything. In terms of the youth, I took over an agency at 26, so I feel like the youth are they're key to my success and key to the success of my organization. I think we have to make an apologetic effort to make sure at least 30 to 40% of your staff is under 35. And this isn't your admin staff necessarily, this is just your team. It's harder in government because of how civil service work, but it's easier in project management units, and it's definitely easier in NGOs. And I don't know where he is. We have a youth specialist here today because I decided that we were going to have a dedicated youth person, and we even have a youth conference to just show you, like, you have to be very, very unapologetic about it, because people say it's not going to get funded, it's not important, but it's very important. It is critical for how you move on. So the people taking over after you are still seen as young. You know, I think the person who took over the Rural Electrification Agency after me is like 37, you know, now, and he's seen a bit older, but back in the day it was unheard of to have a federal agency person under 50. No offense, Kande. So other people can touch on youth. In terms of carbon markets, it's something that we have been focusing on specifically because of how unfair the carbon market framework is to Africa. There are a lot of archetypes that the carbon market does not take in consideration of that needs to. One particular one is displacement of diesel and petrol generating sets, which is huge if you can imagine the market. But because it's so unique to the African and part of South Asia context, it's not actually identified in the proper framework. And I'm focusing on voluntary carbon markets because that's where I think we should focus on. I think the compliance market took Europe a decade, and we will get there, but the voluntary market is what we need to, you know, focus on now. So apart from the archetypes, there's also key issues, as in the two key kind of gold standard agencies that you want your carbon markets to be sold in are nowhere on continent, right? So people need to fly in. So it is very expensive for someone to go through, trying to get, do carbon trading. Like I said, I've got money from the World Bank, AFDB, pretty much everybody, but I haven't ever hit that carbon trading, kind of network, and that was because I was running a program in Lagos State, actually, where we're going to displace 1 million generating sets. And I think one of the conditions was to get the picture number plate of all of the million. It was something ridiculous, and I was like, come, that is not going to happen. But, so we are, I think it's called the African Carbon Market Initiative that we're going to launch at COP, looking at this issue and also looking at the pricing of carbon. Because like Gucci buys probably buy it from you, some of the carbon trade from Kenyan cook stoves and stuff, but is it the right price? How is it priced? And then building up the integrity of the African carbon market, because it has so many co-benefits that we haven't been put in. So you do have the Deltas and the airlines of the world saying, we'll buy from you if you can prove the integrity. But how do you prove the integrity if nobody is on ground to verify the integrity? And this is the role that I feel my organization at the United Nations has to play a key role. So that's it on carbon markets. And then there was another question on stoves and solar home systems and stuff. I think the solar home systems crew in Nigeria have benefited so much from the subsidy that they don't want to subsidize anything themselves. And this is the problem when you have continuous subsidy. So I'm not going to come and say to get the cook stoves up and running, it means you have to develop a bigger subsidy. I think the market is there. I think people are paying more for what you guys are offering. And I think it's all about scale. And I think this is where government comes in, right? How do you locally produce some of the materials? How do you locally produce some of the ethanol and things? Maybe Coco will come down to Nigeria and show you guys a better way of doing things. And let's try and benefit. We do too many things in silos as different African countries, right? And I think being able to let other Africans come into a different country and give them the benefits that they would have given anybody from a developed country to come into the space really needs to be there. So that's where I think we take that space. And I think the last question was on regional collaboration. I think that's always been there. I think strangely enough, you'd be surprised with the ECOWASs and things like that, how strong regional collaboration is. I think what happens is that the tools might not be as accessible. So you will find the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan or the Kenyan one online now. It will show you a pathway of how to develop it yourselves. I don't want to go everything on regional because I feel like with big organizations like the IEA, ARENA, they focus so much on regional that they haven't looked at the nuances of the different countries. There's just some certain things to make things work, right? You have to take in consideration that local, sometimes sub-local experiences as well and feed them all up. But I do believe now, we're doing work in Sierra Leone. It's really for the countries to come up and say, we need help. And someone will respond. I think it's working a lot better than people think, how Africans are responding, especially on the continent to other Africans.
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
Listening to Damola, I'm tempted to say that I associate myself with the sentiments that she's expressed and have nothing more useful to add. but having said that, I guess that the point that I made earlier that clean cooking should be everybody's business cannot go without repetition. And it's important that clearly listening to the panel members, the delivery unit network is an important component of this entire Clean Cooking Alliance agenda that we all ought to expeditiously work to ensure that it sees the light of day, so that we can share the ideas that people have, we can learn best practice from other countries to implement it with our own jurisdictions to ensure that the objectives that we set are achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophie, closing comments?
Just to add on about the carbon credits.
Carbon credits as well.
For us, as a startup that is growing, the way we're able to subsidize the cooker and the ethanol is using carbon credits. So you're right, it's pretty challenging just to be registered as a carbon project. The process, a lot of startups will not be able to do. But when you think about what Damilola said about the integrity, if you're to get top dollar, you have to guarantee the integrity of your carbon credits. It doesn't make sense for you to just go and set up a carbon project and say you're selling carbon credits to someone to offset, and yet you cannot guarantee that they are of high integrity. For us, we've used technology. We have visibility of all the 660,000 customers because they purchase, everything is done on the cloud, so we're able to actually verify the integrity. That means that we can actually ask for a higher premium on the price of the carbon credits we are selling. It's a challenge for a lot of countries. A lot of countries are developing the regulations. Even Kenya is in the initial stages of developing. I believe Uganda as well, Ghana as well. The challenge is, and we're calling on governments not to penalize us. That is what we hope governments will not do, because if you say you're going to heavily tax carbon revenue as a source of revenue, then it essentially kills you as a business if you're relying on that to sustain the business model. It's important that, again, it's what we are saying, it's partnership. It has to be, government has to be willing to call private sector, other players to the table. Let us understand what is carbon, what is this carbon credit, what is this animal? Let us not look at it as another animal to milk and fill our coffers. It needs to be recognized and put in its rightful place. For us, it's an avenue to reduce deforestation. Government, if you tax it, it will mean essentially that cocoa will not be able to achieve that target. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, closing comments, and then Danilo.
So I think maybe just to echo this carbon credit, so sort of a, I don't call it a detail, but a feature is that we recognize that the market price of carbon around the world discriminates. The market price is set up to make it work well for big companies. We also know that the so-called social cost of carbon, which is a new nerdy tool, is one that is a much higher number. The most recent number that came out was over $180 per ton for the social cost. If you don't reflect that by saying we value the SDGs, we value energy access, we value clean cooking, what you do is you discriminate against new companies, you discriminate against cocoa, you discriminate against the groups that could actually provide services. So one of the things that the donor nations could do is to say we're going to set a floor price and we're going to benefit this, and if a project hits the following social markers, we will value that credit more highly. That is not hard to do. That's basic good banking policy, and it's social policy. And so there's a place where, again, a lot of our talk could come down in a quite concrete way to support efforts. Pro-community projects, anti-deforestation, anti-removing resources from communities. It's a concrete step forward that would enable this. So again, it's a detail, but it's a critical detail if you do want to enable these new companies coming up.
Thank you.
So as usual, I completely agree with Dan. Another thing that we are trying to really push is some future market commitments. So with my brothers and sisters in Nigeria, I think if you knew somebody was going to buy X amount of credits for cook stoves for 1 million people, all of a sudden you find a way of connecting them. So that's what we're trying to push in Africa as well. How do we get some future commitments from some large, big groups to encourage markets to just thrive organically, because you know the money is coming from there. And I think carbon markets, honestly, I feel like it's going to be the next biggest export in Africa. I think it's a huge opportunity, and governments should really look at it, and more particularly, do not penalize the small companies. So the big companies don't get penalized, it will be the small ones. Let it just grow first, and then we take it from there. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, you've heard the discussion in the panel. We've tried to make the case why you need dedicated technical units focused on clean cooking within government agencies. And you've heard all the advantages, helping the ministers coordinate the inputs from various ministries, because clean cooking touches on so many issues, being a good focal point for private sector entities that want to go into the supply side of fuels and technology to those markets, and they have a constant interlocutor. You've also had the benefits now, looking at these new areas of climate finance. Climate finance is not a simple exercise, very complex and sophisticated, but in general, the planning, the integrated planning. I know ministers who are interested in clean cooking. They say, but I don't have anybody. Electrification, yes. World Bank, everybody helped me over 10 years. I have those staff. But clean cooking, what's that? So this is why we argue you need these dedicated delivery units within countries, but also helping the learning. The issue our lady from Kenya raised, that we can learn from each other. We want to learn from Ghana and Kenya because they're way advanced. So these technical experts we can also create as a network, so we have that learning amongst ourselves going forward. I want to thank you very much for joining us. There's a lot of work to do. We heard the numbers today. We need to scale up now. The numbers are large for us in Africa, a lot of Africans in the room, still 920 million people lacking access to clean cooking, the only region where the numbers are growing. To deal with that, we need more investments, but we need government, regulations, creating markets, but also private sector to get in. We need the support beyond pilot projects, but to real scale. And we need to make Damilola's life easy. So when she goes to COP27, she says, yes, all of Africa is ready now to join the climate race, but we need industrialization and we need cash. Thank you very much. We thank our panel for joining us. Announcements? Any announcements?
I think that's all, guys. Thanks so much for this wonderful panel. A couple of quick announcements, scheduling change and lunch update. But thank you so much, guys. On a lunch is starting now in Papillon, upstairs on 3, and in Chez George at the top of the stairs. All you need is your name badge to get in, and you'll be allowed in. It's a buffet style, so and same in Papillon as in Chez George. Scheduling again is 1:30 for lunch. The next session will begin at 2:30. 2:30, so we're trying to make up a little bit of time, so 2:30, next sessions will start. Thank you so much.